Hey everyone, welcome back. Expanding the Zone. I'm Shane Combs. He's Matt Combs, and we coming to you here on show 63. And hope this show finds everybody listening and/or watching around the holiday season. Hope you and your family are well. We appreciate you making us a part of that routine each and every week here during basketball season. As always, thank you, Dr. Chris Good, for all the support. And Matt, we talk about support. We continue to get great feedback, and you and I had been talking about a variety of things that probably linked a little bit to enrollment. You and I have talked a little bit about the OHSAA and some of the division talk. We've been talking rule changes. Another rule change that's been on our radar is the mercy rule, and those are some of the different things we'll unpack during the entire show tonight. But as we've mentioned before, so much of what we do on here is professional development. You and I are fans of what we do. I mean, we're fans of high school sports. We love working with kids. We've made an entire adult life out of that. And recently, I know that you introduced me to a particular podcast, and I had to listen today. And like a lot of podcasts I listen to, I won't say that I agreed 100% with everything, but I thought there was some fair points made, and that's what I love about podcasts. Is just that opportunity to do what I hope we do here on Expanding the Zone, which is just kind of get people thinking about some different things. Why don't you lead into the show this week and tell the listeners a little bit about what brought all that on?
Well, like you said, Shane, we've been getting quite a bit of feedback, which is great. I think since we started doing these basketball shows, maybe we're getting more feedback than we even have in the past. And one of the things, we did the show. We've done a couple shows that were talked about rule changes. We've talked about some different things involving officials, right? I had an official stop me. We talked about the official that reached out through email to us last week, and then I had an official stop me just this weekend at a game. A guy who honestly I think's probably a Hall of Fame level official in my book. Been doing it a long time, and he kind of caught me by surprise. Honestly, I wasn't aware that he was a listener to the show, and he said, "Hey, I've been listening to it," and and I think the thing about it is, when you do these podcasts, what people have to understand is you're not doing this so that just so everybody agrees with you. That's not the point. That's not the idea. We're not looking for affirmation or confirmation as to what we believe. We're simply saying what we believe, and we welcome discussion. We welcome disagreement at times. That's fine. And it'd be interesting as more officials. We've had a couple officials reach out, and like, I can't imagine that the officials that listen to our show agree with everything we say, because I think we have been, in our minds, honest about some things. And the interesting thing about coaching and playing and officiating, Shane, I think you'll agree, is when you've done one but not the other, you probably don't have a complete point of view. In other words, I have coached for a long time. I've never officiated. So I can't sit here and really have a true perspective from an official's point of view, and I think officials who have never coached, it's vice versa, right? They can't see things through a coach's eyes. And there are some of those people that fall into that rare category of having done both, right? Guys who have coached, later became officials, or maybe the other way around. Those are maybe a few of the people that actually can see it both ways. Guys that have actually maybe coached at a varsity level, or at least a high school level, they can probably see it a little differently, or guys that have officiated. So my point to all that is, for us, Shane, as being people who have only coached, it is great to get that perspective from an official, right? To see where they're coming from on this. And I would like to think maybe our perspective can help other people too. So the feedback's been excellent. One of the things you mentioned it, Shane, uh, that we do, we listen to some podcasts too, or we listen to some radio shows. And I came across an interesting one this week. And I think the reason I want to mention this show, Shane, is because it allows us to maybe review a couple of these rule changes that we talked about early in the year, right? I know we're gonna dig into a few of them tonight in a little more detail. But I want to go back for just a minute. We had talked a little bit about the new tournament ranking system, right? I think it was a couple episodes ago, maybe, about how Maxpreps now is going to rank the teams for tournaments. We had talked a little bit about how there had been a rumor at the time, which has since been confirmed, that it's at least under consideration now that the OHSAA may go to more divisions for all the sports, football already having more divisions, the other sports now like basketball and soccer, baseball, softball, that going to more divisions. We had touched on that briefly when we brought it up. It was sort of floating around as a rumor, and now that has been confirmed that the OHSAA Board of Control has been talking about it. There was a radio show out of I believe it's out of Athens County, 970 AM WATH, and I had come across it sort of by accident, honestly, through Facebook, through 740 Sports on Facebook, had put a link to it. And I tuned in the other day, and I found it really interesting, their discussion. I had called you, Shayne, and said, "Hey, why don't you listen to this too? And let's just use this show a little bit as a way to kind of lead into our discussion or our review of some things that we've already discussed." They did an episode, Shayne, just entitled OHSAA, with the S being a dollar sign, okay, which was creative for sure. And basically, what it discussed were two topics. It discussed the tournament procedure with Maxpreps, the new tournament procedure that's going to go in, and then this idea of adding more divisions. So I wanted to mention a couple things they had brought up on the show, some of their opinions, some of which I agree with personally, some of which I probably would offer some pushback and maybe don't agree with as much. And I purposely, Shayne, I wanted you to listen to the show, which you said you have, but we purposely haven't discussed it, you and I, so that we can just kind of shoot from the hip a little bit tonight and really not know each other's opinions. So why don't we start, Shayne, with this Maxpreps tournament selection procedure? Okay, we're in girls basketball. We're what, maybe a third of the way through the season, maybe a hair more in some cases.
Most
Boys,
teams have played 7 or 8 games, I
right?
think. Yeah.
Boys, maybe a quarter of the way through. We're starting to see these rankings now. It's starting to bring up some questions. Why don't we start with that a little bit? I know one of the things they had mentioned on the show, Shayne, is one of the major weaknesses they had brought up that I personally agree is a major weakness is the fact that there's no recognition for size of school that you play. Okay, so unlike the Joe Itell football rankings, the size of the school you play doesn't factor in. Let's start with that and then kind of go anywhere you want with it from there, Shayne.
Yeah, I think my first reaction probably was related to things I go through in leadership all the time. I think what happens, Matt, is you have scenarios where you understand over the course of time that something's not right, and you recognize that there needs to be a fix. And you're talking about, like, we don't want people to always just say, "Yeah, we agree with you, you're right," because I've always said I'm not trying to be right, I'm trying to get it right. I love what I do, and I want to get it right so that we can have coaches, we can have officials, we can have fans, we can have student athletes, we can have the OHSAA making whatever money they need to make. Everybody can get what they need out of it, because I really believe in high school sports. So when I listened to this, I felt a little bit like I feel in my leadership roles sometimes, where I think sometimes people come across something new and they want it to be all perfect right out of the gate. When you start to break this down, there's certainly holes in this. But as you and I highlighted there a couple weeks back, there's certainly plenty of holes in the other format as well.
Sure.
And I think, yes, the part that I'm not naive to, do I think there's been some money in fact, I think I said either on 60 show 62 or 61, I can't remember which segment it was, but I was talking about how I was a little concerned that there was a little bit of a hidden agenda, a little bit of a financial gain. Yes, I said that. So
Right.
I obviously agree with that. But I think it's a step in the right direction. And I think what sometimes has to happen is you put something in place and you get a lot right, and you still get some things wrong. I really feel like this is probably just a speed bump in the process that will eventually get us to a better place. So many things that they were talking about, and in this particular topic in general, I found myself going back to that in terms of, if you are going to evaluate it on the whole, then there's certainly plenty of negative to pull from. But in relation to what you and I had talked about before, I guess I view it as a positive step, a positive attempt. I am bothered a little bit about by the personal agenda. The dollar bill sign, was well symbolized. But at the same time, I think it's a step forward. And the other part that I would throw in before I throw it back to you is you just talked about perspective. You were talking about how a coach views it, how an official views it. How, I think it's so interesting because I think what we're talking about here in these, for lack of a better term, what's going to eventually be the computer point system or whatever you want to call it, right?
Right.
It's the formula is it is division driven. It is small school, medium sized school, big school. It is a lot of those different things. And I think perspective is a lot different in terms of how it affects, say, a Division 4 school all the way up to a Division 1 school. And I think that plays into a big role. And I think it's throughout this show, we're going to be able to talk a lot of perspective from not only the teams going through it, but the athletic directors playing a role in the different things involved. So the two things, again, that I would love to hear your thoughts would be, is it a step in the right direction? Certainly not a fix all. But then is there also a perspective here that is going to change your opinion depending on what hat you put on when you go to view this particular thing?
Well, I'll start with this. Anything, I think it had to be taken out of the coach's hands. I mentioned that a couple shows ago, okay, with the tournament procedure. I told the story of how every Athens Bulldog fan was so mad at me back in 2015 or whatever it was, right around there. When we had the situation where, and I won't go through it again, where, I did what I felt like was the ethical thing and voted Logan Elm the 1 seed in that tournament that year, who had beaten Athens and all of that. You can go back and listen to that if you're interested in that story. But because of that, we talked about, remember, I used that as an example of how coaches were put in terrible positions. They either voted ethically and did it the right way, which they came under fire sometimes from their league schools, or they just partnered up with their league school, which wasn't really supposed to be the idea. The idea was supposed to be vote for the best teams, right? So we talked about how I think, and I still believe it's important to take it out of the coach's hands. I think that what bothers me about this, where I agree with the radio show we referenced earlier on WATH, is that it where I agree with them is this was obviously a money-driven thing or a partnership with Maxpreps that wasn't looked into enough. And because we already have a football system that's pretty good now. When I listened to their show, they talked about how really, I don't think they used the word perfect, but they almost implied that the football system was perfect, and it's really not. The football system has some holes too, and we discussed that, how you don't get credit for a 3-point loss to the best team in the state because it's a loss, right? You don't get any credit for that. So there's no real strength of schedule component to Joe Itel unless you win, right? I mean, if you play a tough team and lose, and it's zero, it's nothing. Whereas this system actually gives you some credit for playing a tough schedule, even if you don't win, right? And I think, if I remember right, we talked about how there really probably needs to be a combination of the two systems, Joe Itel and this Maxpreps system, where you get a little bit of strength of schedule recognition for playing a tough game, win or lose, but yet there has to be some credit or weight giving to playing a bigger school. Like if you play a Division 1 team that goes 11-11 and you win, it ought to mean more than beating a 14-6 Division 4 team in basketball. You see what I'm saying? And right now, the 14-6 one would be better. You know, you could beat a 14-6 Division 4 team; it'd be better than an 11-11 Division 1 team. And I think that's where you get into some real iffiness. And I think their frustration on their show was that the people in Maxpreps just refusing to even see the weaknesses in it. You know, it's almost like we're going to defend this to the tilt instead of just admit that, okay, maybe there are some holes in it. Because like you said, I don't think there's anything wrong with admitting there's some holes in it. It's the first year of the system. It needs to be tweaked, right? Most of these systems we have in place that we like weren't perfect from day one. Like you said, there needs to be adjustments along the way. So I think it was just interesting because I think what we're going to see when tournament draws come out, Shayne, and maybe I'll be wrong, but I think we're going to see some craziness in some spots. I think we're going to see some teams where we say, okay, this team's probably the best team in their district or the second or third, and they're a fifth seed or something. We're going to see something weird like that go down a little bit where, and it's probably going to cause some controversy or whatnot. Hopefully, I guess what I'm hoping moving forward is we just we learn from our mistakes. We tweak this system a little bit. I do think it's a step in the right direction because I don't know what else you do other than do like the NCAA basketball and have like a committee. And I think at the high school level, it'd be hard to put a committee together because you're going to have a hard time finding enough unbiased people who don't have a connection with certain schools. And I just don't think that would work. I think computerized systems are the only way to go with this. It's just a matter of, I guess, tweaking the algorithm so that it works. I guess so that would be my final thought, I guess, on the tournament part of their conversation.
Well, yeah, and that's why I love the feedback there that you're giving on the perspective, because as you said, yeah, here's how coaches are going to look at it. Here's the person who's giving the product, so to speak, and they're going to defend their computer system, right? This is good because of this. The OHSAA is going to defend and say it's not for money, which it obviously is.
Right.
Um, and but at the same time, I know sometimes I laughed just the other day where, you know, oftentimes in leadership to get what you want, you know how you deal with those people where you make them feel like it's their idea.
Right.
So by the time you get done with the conversation, you make it feel like, hey, I thought you had a real good idea here. Why don't we try that? You know what I mean? And go ahead and move
Right.
forward. And again, that's where the ego aside, you're list. So if this makes the OHSA feel better to call it that, and Maxpreps gets to do, I guess I don't care about that because what I want as a coach, that's my perspective, right?
Right.
I want it to just get better. This is a step in the right direction. Do I think there's a lot of bells and whistles out there and we can talk? Yeah, but I do think we can make some improvements and go. Now, where I want to take that real quick, is another perspective in terms of the athletic director, something you know a lot about. I feel like as I prepared for tonight's show, I kept coming back to something I've always been passionate about in all sports. I don't think there's anything more important in high school program building than scheduling. And I think this is going to change a little bit of that landscaping. But I wondered your take in terms of the AD, specifically the AD coach relationship within the specific sport, in this case, basketball. And, a lot of conferences with the 22 games now get at least 8, in some cases 10, maybe 12 games that they kind of control who they play. What kind of impact do you think this is going to have on an important relationship of athletic director and coach when it comes to, hey, who we going to play?
Well, it's going to be it's really going to add a lot of careful thought into how you schedule because to be honest with you, again, with the current system the way it is, all right, and hopefully Maxpreps will learn from some mistakes here, and OHSAA will learn from mistakes and tweak this thing. But as it currently stands, it doesn't really benefit you from a seeding standpoint to play a tough schedule in terms of scheduling like higher division opponents that are going to create really difficult matchups for you. Because here's why. Okay, let's just take, if you're a Division 3 school, if you're going to schedule a Division 1 school that's going to go 20-2, chances are you're going to have a hard time beating them, right? So, and if you go schedule a Division I school that's going to go 12-10, that still may be a really good step up for you to play that competition. But then if you beat them, win or lose, I guess, because it's based on the winning percentage, you're getting credit for beating a team that's barely over 500. There's no credit for that being, well, yeah, they're barely over 500, but their enrollment's 4 times what ours is or whatever, right? I guess let me give you an example. Everybody knows I'm at Uniota as an athletic director now. We're in a situation with our girls basketball team where we scheduled some really competitive games this year, right? We played Huber Heights Wayne a couple weeks ago, played Dublin Kaufman last night, going to play Westerville South, going to play Olentangy. I watched a team last night that they play. We're recording this on the 18th on a Monday, and I had watched our girls play Dublin Kaufman in a thing up at Ohio Dominican. And this Dublin Kaufman team very well might end the season with a losing record. Now, this has been a program that has been really, really good the last few years, had some major, major players graduate from it, including the Shelton girl. The Shelton girl is playing at Ohio State right now, and some other Division I players, but they've graduated them. In their mind, they may be right there on the verge of what you would call a rebuilding year for whatever that's worth. They still had a Division I guard, right? Good team. But that win for Uniota last night, while being a really, really good win for them based on what the schedule they typically would schedule non-league games, right? Like just Southeast District non-league teams, they're not going to get any more credit for that than a win they had earlier this year over a solid, say, Lynchburg Clay team, who's a solid team. Take nothing away from them. Lynchburg Clay is not as good as Dublin Kaufman. I watched both those games, but Lynchburg Clay is probably going to win more games. You understand what I'm saying on that? So it's one of those things where, so my point to your question as an AD, it's a fine line. Do you schedule those games knowing they're going to probably prepare you for tournament? Because you have to do that, right? Don't you have to schedule some games to sort of prepare you for tournament in terms of prepare you for the battles you're going to face in tournament, but it doesn't prepare you for the tournament seed? Does that make sense, Shayne? Like, so the seed, you may hurt yourself in the seed, but help yourself by playing better competition. I guess that's my biggest dilemma as an AD. If you're a baseball coach, right? So if you take your however many non-league games you get, how do you juggle that? Do you say, if you had a team that you thought, you're Division IV, right, in baseball, and if you had a team that you said, I think that we are a regional team or even a state tournament caliber team this year, we're really good, we want to schedule up, how do you juggle that and say, okay, I'm going to go play a Division I team up in Columbus if I can get them to play me, right? If I can get them to play me, I'm going to go play that, versus why don't I just go beat a Division IV team that's going to win 16 baseball games, but I know I'm better than, and get credit for that? You understand that dilemma there? I don't know the answer to that yet because we're just sort of starting in this, right? It's kind of a trial run almost, but it's going to take a lot of. It's going to really take. It's almost going to take like a math teacher to help you out with this thing. Try to figure this thing out.
Well, I think you're right. I think as any system changes, you start to look at the rules and you try to put your programs and your kids in the best position possible, balancing what you said, balancing playing the game in
Mm-hmm.
terms of how do I, you know, accumulate the most points so that I can have the best seed while still having myself battle tested.
Right.
I
That's what
think
I'm
it's
trying to
inter-
say. Yeah. Right.
yeah, I think that's the interesting point you're making in a high level example. But what I would argue is that's a little bit in terms of say our area an outlier situation, whereas if you look at the normal middle of the pack teams and then the bottom level teams and teams that are maybe going through, you see this a lot in the SVC. You mentioned Pain Valley being Division Four. I know a conference you're very familiar with, the TVC Ohio, right? You have some Division Two teams that normally play at the top of that conference, and then some Division Three teams that normally play in the middle to bottom of it, more years than not. Um, and I guess what I'm saying too is you have that balance of how are you going to play? Because if you're that elite team, I know there's a lot of years when I've had some of those better teams. Yeah, you'd like to have the one seed, but if you're good and you're battle tested, it's one of those where, well, you know, put me wherever you want on the bracket and we're ready. You know what I mean? Like, and we're going. Uh, but some of those other teams, sometimes winning a sectional or some different things could completely depend on where you are in the bracket. So I do. I think it's interesting. You learn the system, you play the system. What you're describing is completely happened. It's happened in football. People have had to adjust who they play. I can remember coaches in football telling me that it doesn't do us any good to play this team because if we beat them, then they're not good enough to win more than 2 or 3 games. And if they're good enough to win 7 or 8 games with who they play, we can't beat them. So it's one of those where it doesn't match on the schedule, right? So
Right.
you're exactly right. It's a situation where you're going to learn the points, you're going to learn how it goes, and you're going to balance maybe having a battle tested situation in comparison to playing the computer point game in terms of where you fall. I think that's really interesting.
You
On
know,
that,
oh, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, go ahead, Shane.
Well, I was just going to say on that particular note, as they started to carry over into the division talk, where did you think that filtered over? Because I kind of by the end of it, I almost found myself thinking full circle, going back and forth on some of these different things because I agreed with them for the most part on everything, or at least 90% of everything they said on the Maxpreps thing. Where I probably disagreed with them the most is when they started talking about the expansion of the fifth division or the sixth division. They were kind of, if I understood where they were coming from, they were okay with helping some of the Division One discrepancy, but they felt like 2, 3, 4, 5 were fine if you had just one. They were totally against the sixth. Um, again, I thought that was a really interesting perspective that I have a completely different perspective of because I've made a career out of either being one of the biggest Division 4 schools in the state or one of the smallest Division 3 schools in the state. And I'm telling you, there's two different worlds there. Um, a Meadowbrook. I know we have listeners over east somewhere. You know, I know Meadowbrook's a school that sometimes they play in D2, sometimes they play in D3, and I've watched their teams be successful in both. But I've watched far bigger success rates in the Division 3 side. Um, I guess I would love to hear your take on how much do you think it's going to go because you've lived in a world of Division 2 where you can really get into some high level play by the time you get to the top end of that enrollment. So when you hear them say that Divisions 2, 3, and 4, they've always been fine. What was your take on that?
Yeah, I was kind of with you on that, Shane. Like, so I agreed pretty much wholeheartedly with their take on Maxpreps, and disagreed with a lot of what they had to say about the adding of divisions. Now, I will say this: if their frustration was from the OHSAA trying to make money, hey, I'm with them. Okay, listen, let's not kid ourselves to think any decision the OHSAA makes isn't at least in part due to money. I mean, every decision they make, they're going to consider finances, they're going to consider money,
No
they're going to
question.
consider profit. So I think we can just go ahead and all agree to agree on that. But like in terms of the division, adding division, I'm having a hard time seeing the negative in it. Okay. If your negative is the OHSA makes more money, okay, then that's fine. But or how they sell it, right? We're doing what's best for the athletes. Totally, I get it. You know, I get the some of the BS that comes with all that. Okay, but like, but what I'm saying is, what is the downside to adding more divisions? What is the downside? Because, like, I don't see how you can be against adding more divisions unless you are against divisions, 7 divisions in football. If you say right now, I think we should go 4 divisions in football, okay, well, then I'll respect your opinion and let's go 4 divisions. But don't sit here and tell me you think football's great and we have 7 divisions, but we think basketball and baseball should just be stuck with 4, because that's not fair to basketball and baseball coaches, okay, which you and I have been, right? I mean, I was a basketball coach at a Division 2 school that I can assure you had way less resources, less kids involved in athletics than most schools we had to compete against. You know, if anyone wants to take a drive through MacArthur, Ohio, and I love Benton County, I love the people there. I spent 22 years there. I love the town of MacArthur. I love everything about it. Truthfully, I do. It'll always have a place in my heart. But drive through MacArthur, Ohio, and then drive through Marietta. Okay, then drive through Washington Courthouse, drive through Jackson, drive through those schools, okay, or those towns, and then tell me where MacArthur fits into that. You see what I'm saying? Like, I was in a Division II school that was so spread out over the course of a whole county that the kids we actually got to draw from that played athletics was a relatively small group. It would have been a group very much like the other teams in our league, such as Nelsonville, Alexander, Wellston, etc. Okay, even Athens. Again, MacArthur, Athens. Compare the two. You know what I mean? Compare the two. So what I'm saying is, you can't convince me that Division II doesn't have discrepancy just like Division I. Does Division I have the bigger discrepancy? Sure, yeah, I get it. There's 900 kids, from the top to the bottom or whatever. I get that, but let's not pretend like the other divisions don't have discrepancies here. And I just don't see the negative. Is the negative that we have 7 state champions instead of 4? Does that somehow water it down? Because I don't think it does. I don't think these football teams that are winning a Division VII state championship feel like it doesn't really count. Well, it's Division VII. No, they're having a parade through town, right, the day after the state championship. So I just don't see a negative in it. I mean, I guess help me out, Shane. Like what's the downside of it? What's the downside of having more divisions?
Well, I agree from the standpoint of what you're talking about, of what it adds to the student athlete, what it adds to communities, what it adds to schools, and the opportunities for more and more teams to go. I think what happened in their podcast, if I followed them correctly, and again, I can relate to what they're saying, is their frustration with the OHSAA carried over from one thing to another, to another, to another. And I'm with you. If the frustration is the dollar sign, if the frustration is the OHSAA kind of saying they're doing it for this when really they're doing it for that, I totally follow what they're saying. But as someone who's coached for going on 3 decades now, it's to me, it's time. It's one of those things. If you look back to when we had the 3 classes through what the late '80s, and then we came to the fourth, it's just as enrollments have gone different directions, and we kind of look all throughout Ohio. Yes, there's this discrepancy in Division I, but there's still a need for discrepancy all the way through, because don't forget, the elephant in the room that we're talking about in every division is still the private versus public
Sure.
debate, right? So again, the ability to spread out a little bit and to do some of those different things, I think just brings that much more parity to it all, which we're going to talk about the lack of parity and where that goes here in just a second. It gives a little bit more of an opportunity for programs in all areas, all different types of communities, all different types of league structures to compete into the postseason and have an opportunity. And I'm with you. If more student athletes are getting a legitimate chance, we're not just handing them out. It's not everybody gets a ribbon, but if more opportunity is to compete for the sectional, the district, the regional, the state, I just feel like it's a great opportunity for all involved, and that's where I think it gives it's a great chance. Now, is the OHSAA going to make more money along the way? Well, sure. Anytime you have that many more regionals, that many more state semifinals, that many more state championships, yeah, they're gonna make more money. Whatever that, from my perspective, that's not really what I'm worried about. I'm worried about having more opportunity to watch high school programs, high school players get the opportunity to play on some of these stages and to compete for these different things, which I think would go a long, long way in something that is starting to fall apart, which is community, which is school pride, which is programs building, which is a little bit more parity across the board, more schools having more of a chance to compete, and I think our game can grow in a lot of different areas of Ohio instead of a few places that have started to develop a little bit of a monopoly, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, that's well said, Shane. I mean, um, I think you pretty much said it well. I mean, said kind of what I'm trying to say, which is just, I think more good comes from this than any negative. I really believe that. I think it's high time. I don't understand why it was okay for football years and years ago, and it's never been okay for the other sports. I think it needs to be with the other sports as well. Um, you know, uh, it's again, the OHSA is the OHSA, right? But it doesn't mean that every decision they make is terrible, even if it is driven in a lot of ways financially. Okay, I think this would be one that if they could pull this one off would be the right call. I think it would be beneficial to a lot of schools.
And I guess, am I wrong? Because again, you've played the athletic director role at a much higher level than me and for longer than me. Am I wrong and not caring if the OHSA is going to make some money on whatever? Fine. I just want it to be better. Am I almost quitting on the greater good there, or tell me? I would love some feedback on if I'm missing something in my role as an administrator, my role as a coach, my role in the athletic administration, all those different things.
No, I don't think so because listen, we can't control what the Ohio High School Athletic Association's motivations are, right? That those are going to be what they are. I think what we want is we just want to see decisions that also benefit, you know, student athletes. And I do believe that the adding divisions does that. Do for instance, the expansion of the playoffs, that would be a better thing to me by better example maybe of, even though it gives kids a chance to play, it's maybe not always best for student athletes, right? We get ourselves put in some situations where we have some lopsided games there early on, and football's a violent sport, so you have injury situations, all that. You're talking about these other sports, Shane, where everybody already gets into the tournament, right? I mean, in all the other sports, everybody's in. So all we're really doing is just trying to, by stretching it out, by trying to add a little more competitive balance and parity, like you said, right? It's not like we're putting anybody at risk. It's not like we're throwing anybody to the wolves. I mean, everybody's already in the tournament anyway. All we're doing is really giving more opportunity for teams to advance further.
Well, and that leads me over to something that's kind of been lingering on our agenda now for 2 or 3 weeks, and it came up again 2 or 3 times to me this week. I actually have counted from the time we recorded show 62 to tonight. I've watched 5 more examples of the continuous clock. So we're
Right.
sitting here talking about parity, Matt, right? And we're talking about parity more in the tournament setting or in scheduling or in seeding or whatever it may be. Well, now let's just talk about parity on a night in, night out basis. When first of all, why don't you explain to the people kind of what the mercy rule, or lack of a better term,
Right.
what goes into the clock running there in high school basketball?
Well, so, we had this in football first, then it filtered over into basketball. Basically, what the rule is if a team gets ahead by 35 points or more in the second half, then the clock keeps running. The clock runs continuously, with the exception of a timeout, okay, or an injury timeout, some sort of stoppage outside of the normal play, right? It runs through free throws. It runs through, ball getting knocked out of bounds, subs coming in. A coach has to wipe up some water off the floor in front of the bench for, 15 seconds. Clock keeps running, right?
Very
Uh,
similar to summer basketball or the scrimmages that you play where
right.
you just kind of put a time up on there and run it. Yeah.
Right. That's basically what it comes down to. And the idea obviously is to try to keep scores from getting way out of hand. And I think what I want to do tonight, Shane, if we can, is just discuss some positives and negatives. You said you've seen some examples. I've seen several examples this year. Not only with watching games from at the school I coach, um, we've had several of those in the girls basketball situations, but we've also had some at the junior high levels. See, this is what people forget too. I've seen some at JVs. I've seen some in junior high, Shayne. I've seen some in some films that I've watched. So I have, when I guess when this became a rule, I kind of thought, well, we'll only see this occasionally. And I guess I've seen it more than I thought I would see it. I guess, you know what I mean? And so I guess I've seen maybe more of these blowout situations than I thought I would, but it's given me sort of a unique perspective of having seen it in a lot of different ways. And then what really led, like you said, led to this show this week is how many people have approached us at different times. I talked this week to a junior high coach. I talked to a youth basketball coach who had an opinion on this. Obviously, I've talked to some varsity coaches along the way. Um, so it's really, really interesting. I do think this is a rule. I think this is one of these rules, Shayne, there are positives and negatives. I mean, you can really pick out both sides of this. I think that's what makes it interesting to discuss, is that there are really two sides of this coin a little bit. So I don't know where you want to start exactly. Like I said, I kind of wanted to discuss some positives and negatives. I'll let you go first. Either side of that coin, wherever you want to start with it.
Well, I'm going to start on the positive side of it. I think the on the surface the rule is really really good. I think when a basketball game in the second half reaches 35, I think that's a fair number. It's not like you're talking 20. You know what I mean? It's
Mhm.
not like, a team didn't play very well, you didn't shoot it very well that night, and hey, I'm down 20 all of a sudden. No, you're down 35. You see what
Right,
I'm saying? Like the game's over. Like you're
right.
down 35 in the second half. And in most cases, a score that gets to that spread inside what, 12, 15, 16 game minutes of a junior high JV game, or even a varsity game, somewhere in the 16 to maybe creeping into the 18 to 20-minute range. That both teams, in my opinion, benefit from that game getting over and you moving on to your next game. That's just my opinion. It's a positive thing where it keeps it from turning into. It's one thing when I see a team get beat 56-2 the other night in a varsity basketball game. Um, I don't need to watch them get beat 88-4. And that goes both ways. That's the team that's scoring the 88 too, because Matt, I don't know how to say this without just saying it, because I'm not talking about any particular team, but like there's sometimes you hold a team to a low number and you really defended. When you hold a team to 4, I don't know if that's as much about your defense or as some of the offensive deficiencies the other team has too. Does that make sense? So
Yes.
like from the positive standpoint, I want to make sure I really sequence my points here tonight. So I want to start on the positive standpoint. The game getting over and both teams moving on their way, I think outweighs any of the negative sides of other things that we're going to be talking about. So I'm going to take that stance up front and then pass it back to you.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. I honestly think that one of the big positives for me is not just the helping the team that's getting beat bad. Okay. I honestly think one of the biggest positives is taking a little bit of pressure off of the winning coach, because I think I've seen this a lot over the years where that coach that's in the situation where his team's ahead by a bunch, it's an uncomfortable feeling knowing that, okay, I don't want this to get any worse than it is. Okay. The sportsmanship side of me says, I don't want this to go any further. But here's the situation I'm in. We've got, without this rule, right? We have got, uh, 12 to let's say you've got 12 to 14 minutes of basketball left, right? You've got half the third quarter or more and the fourth quarter to play. And what am I going to tell my kids? Because I'm not going to tell my kids that they can't dribble, pass, shoot the basketball. You know what I mean? They practice every day. I'm putting in my subs. But let's be real honest, in these games that you're talking about that are 50 some to 2, the subs are probably good enough to continue it against the other team's starters. So now what are you going to tell your subs? Hey, you practice really hard every day, but I want you to go in the game and I want you to hold the ball by half court so we don't score any more points and embarrass this team further. Well, you don't want to do that. You want to let your kids play. I mean, it's not fair to them not to let them play. Now, I'm not saying you press full court. I'm not saying but I'm saying, you're going to let your kids go out there and run their offense. And if they have an open shot, you're going to let them take the open shot. I mean, that's part of the game. Okay. And so I think the running clock at least takes some of that pressure off of the winning coach, allows him to let his kids play, and they're not going to be able to rack up, 30 or 40 second half points with this clock running the way it is. So I think that's probably as big a positive as the team that gets drilled. Because I'm going to be real honest with you, Shayne. I've been on both ends of this. And I've been on both ends in my career. I've been on the side where I've got my butt kicked, and I've been on the side where my team's, been the ones that have won by a lot. And both can be uncomfortable. All right. Obviously, you'd rather win. But what I'm saying is when I was on the side of it where my teams got beat by 35, 40 points, the last thing on my mind was how you treated me during that situation. The thing that was on my mind is, man, we just got beat by 35, 40 points. We didn't play good enough. I didn't go home a whole lot thinking, boy, that other coach, he really rubbed it in the night, or like, you understand what I'm saying? Like, if I would have got beat by 35 instead of 45, would I have felt better?
Well,
Okay.
the
So,
the
so,
only
so, so my point is, it can help the winning coach just as much. I think, I
Sure.
think, I think the losing coach or the losing players, they're going to feel bad regardless in that situation. I think the winning players and coach, it takes a little bit of pressure off them. I'm just trying to make sure I'm explaining what I mean by that.
No, you're right. I think in your career, I think in your career, you felt that way because you that very be teams that were on. Now I know you have been on that other side
Well, and
before,
I've been
but
on that
not
other side. I've
not
been on
very
that other
many,
side
not
on
very many times.
in some big stages, though. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? I've been
sure,
on that side in a regional game, so I do know how it
absolutely.
feels. You know what I mean?
No, I get it. I get
Yeah.
it. I get that. And I guess here's what I'm saying on that. Do you agree or disagree with the statement of when a game has reached 35 in the second half, both teams are better off to have that game end and go their separate ways to their next game on the schedule? Do you agree with that concept?
Yes. Yeah, I do. I do think that there's typically something to be gained. Like John Wooden, I think it was, had a quote: "When one
Mhm.
game is over, you're preparing for the next game." So his idea in that situation would be, okay, this game's over, so now I'm going to work on something that could help me win the next game, right? The problem in the scenarios you're talking about, I agree with what Coach Wooden says
Mhm.
about that. But a team that's that much worse than another team, or a team that's that much better than another team, can't work on what they need for the next game because they're not capable of doing it. You see what I'm saying? If
No,
you're
I
getting
get it.
beat, if
Yeah.
you're getting beat by 40 points, you can't look at your team and say, okay, let's go out and really run our offense here and get ready for the next game. Well, coach, we can't run our offense because this other team's better at us in every position and we can't pass and catch. So no, I agree totally that the best part of this rule is that it just puts it, it just takes a game that it's over and just ends it faster. And I think that's probably better for everybody. Yes, I agree with that.
You made a point earlier that jumped out at me, and I have a theory on it. And you talked about how when the rule came in, you didn't think it would play out very much. And I think what's happened is more and more lopsided situations. It seems like the parity is lacking. There seems to be more extreme.
Mhm.
There's a lot of theories on why, in terms of you and I've talked about a lot of things on here. We've talked about little league structure. We've talked about different dynamics in the fifth, sixth grade, different dynamics in the seventh and eighth grade, then going to the JV level. You throw in, there's a lot more movement now in the transfer portal society, right? And there's a lot more movement than there was 20 years ago. And I think there is a little bit more of a discrepancy now. And I guess that's why I found myself, I told you I would do this. I find myself coming full circle in tonight's show. Again, what is the role of the AD and the coach in the scheduling? Don't you feel like a lot of this stuff comes down to scheduling? Like you can pick at the rule or you can pick on the scenarios, but there's a lot of situations that leagues have opportunities to change things in the junior high scheduling.
Yes.
Schools have the opportunity to play different non-league schools. Even in the league scenarios, they have an opportunity to understand junior high and JV scenarios and getting creative in the way they move things around and so forth. So again, I wanted you to kind of combine your AD and coaching situations there and talk about how much control do they have in bringing a little bit more parity or a little bit more of competitive spirit to some of these matchups throughout the year.
Well, I think they play a role. I mean, here's the thing. I would tell you as an AD, you're not going to be able to control at the varsity level for sure your league schedule. Okay, that's just what it is. Now, where you can, and you mentioned junior high, I think a lot of leagues make mistakes in the sense of forcing 2 league games per school on an opponent, right? So now,
Hmm.
you have a seventh grade girls basketball game that's 60-2, and 3 weeks from now those two teams are going to play again, right? Because the league makes them play twice. That is bothersome to me at that age. I think there's more flexibility there. There should be more creativeness there. Again, at the varsity level, not a lot you can do about that. Now, with the non-league schedule, obviously, I think those things have to be considered. I think you have to try to put yourselves into situations. But again, we just talked about the scheduling up, right? Does it benefit you? That whole thing. So these things sort of tie together a little bit, right? But I think that as an AD, you do have to look at that and say, okay, do we want to put our kids in situations where either A, if we're a really good team, where we have some competition in those non-league games, or B, if we're a team that struggles, let's make sure we schedule teams that are appropriate for our skill level so that we can have some competitive games in those situations. I can tell you as an AD though, Shayne, it's easier in theory than it is, to pull off all the time. There's going to be You still have to find 10, 12 teams to play you, right? So it's not always super, super easy to do. But let's be real honest. If I think a lot of it does come down to how hard ADs work at finding that perfect schedule for their teams. Even if they can't bat 1,000, right?
Hmm.
They can at least do they can at least get it mostly right, where they limit those really negative situations a little bit.
No, I agree. And I look down through, I don't want to cut you off. Is there anything throughout the night that I've missed here before I move to um, starting to close us out here a little bit?
Well, I want to talk a little bit about, and we talked about some positives. I want to touch on a couple negatives, and I don't know if you feel like there are any negatives to this rule or not.
Okay.
I feel like there are, and I'd like to get your opinion on it. I think that when I say negatives, let me say this: I don't think there's any negative to having this rule, but I think, like we just talked about with the whole Maxpreps deal, right? Sometimes you have to take something early in its existence and tweak it a little bit. And I do think this rule could use some tweaking to maybe help certain situations. Because some things I notice in it, okay, are especially in like junior high situations where you have 6-minute quarters, right? You're playing 24-minute games to begin with. And all of a sudden you have this running clock, and now you're trying. So if you're a junior high coach, right, and you're trying to play all of your kids. And let's say you're a junior high coach of a team that is typically in running clock situations, okay? That nearly every game your team's winning by that amount. So you've got a group of 7 or 8 of your best players to play, and then you've got a group of maybe your last 5 that you want to play. That is hard to juggle and develop those kids, because you can say, I know what some people are going to say. They're going to be like, well, why don't you play all your players in the first half? You're winning by a bunch anyway. Okay, that's fine. Let's play all 12 players in the first half. But then who do you play in the second half? Is it fair to your starters? They don't come back in. They only play 6 minutes that night and then sit there the rest of the time. Because if you're in that situation game after game after game after game, because maybe of your league, we just talked about league situations, right? Is it fair to the best players on that team that they only play 6, 8 minutes a night? I would argue, no, you're trying to develop those kids for junior high is a developmental league. So now if you play those starters the whole first half, you're up by a ton, go running clock, you bring in your second group or whatever, your last five. Well, now you got 12 minutes of basketball at running clock. How much are those kids really getting to play? I did a thing, Shane, where I think just on free throw situations alone while it's running clock, like you go to the line to shoot two shots. I went back and looked at film from this year, and it was around anywhere between 40 to 47 seconds. I think the average was 44 that I came up with. 44 seconds elapsed on two shot free throws on average on the films I watched. There were some, if you had subs, that it would get up to 50, 52, 53. And there were some that would even be like right at 40 or 39 that would go quicker. Maybe no subs came in or whatever. You know what I mean? You're talking about a huge chunk of time every time somebody goes to the free throw line in the second half where kids are just standing there not playing basketball. I guess what I'm saying to you, Shane, one, do you even agree with that? Or do you think my thoughts on that, on player development and kids getting in the game and things like that. Do you even agree with that to begin with? And then two, is there a way, could we tweak this rule a little bit to either say, okay, let's at least stop the clock on, let's at least on a free throw say that once 30 seconds runs off the clock, we stop it. Or hey, let's start the rule in the fourth quarter. I'm just brainstorming. I'm just throwing things out, right? Is there a way we could still have the mercy rule and serve its purpose while allowing for a little bit more time for coaches to be able to get their bottom of their bench in and allow them some time to participate too? I guess I'll just throw that because that's really the one only negative I guess I see of it.
I I understand where you're coming from, and I want, and this is why I worked so hard at this. I've promised myself. My wife was making fun of me the other day when I was watching Little League basketball, and I was, we talk basketball a lot and so forth, and I was telling her I've really made it a a goal of mine not to get so much on the Little League soapbox and to be more accepting of the modern day culture of the way third, fourth, fifth, sixth grade works, right? In terms of just going out and playing a little bit more, and kids are going to be exposed a little bit earlier, and they're going to play. And I guess what I would say to the point you're making is for people to make that argument, they're going to have to meet me halfway on caring a little bit more about having full junior high rosters, right? I'm seeing more and more seventh grade two-quarter games and more freshman basketball and more JV basketball and all these different things and more full rosters because even some of the best high school varsity basketball teams I see are like seven deep. You know what I mean? Like they're now those seven are incredible, but they're seven deep, and it's a situation where I think you do have outliers. You do have some incredible teams that find themselves in that situation every night. And unfortunately, you have some really bad teams that find themselves in the wrong end of that every night. Now, do I think in the middle, as I break down leagues and I watch a ton of basketball, as I said, I think my count's up into the 60s now in terms of numbers of games I've watched at all levels of basketball. And I've seen a lot of continuous clock, but not all of them are created equally, right? Some of them are different in terms of how we arrive there throughout the course of the night. Some happen right away, and you're like, oh, this is going to be ugly. Others happen gradually, and then a team starts to pull away, or so forth. So again, I wouldn't say that each thing's created equally. I guess my point is you're going to have those outlier situations, and I totally understand if a coach is in a situation where they're getting into that situation a lot, that becomes a factor. Would you agree with that? Like if this is happening to you one way or the other 10, 11, 12 times in a year in comparison to happening once or twice, we're talking about two different scenarios in terms of how much the rule factors into your team. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I think Shane, the thought you mentioned varsity, and all I would say to that is, I think one of the points I was trying to make is more maybe at the junior high level where I've seen some running clock situations of, because I think by the time you get to varsity, it is what it is. And like you said, some of these varsity teams might only be playing 7 kids anyway, right? So
Mhm.
how important is it to develop the end of your bench in those situations, right? I do think I still, maybe I'm just old fashioned. I still believe that the junior high level is developmental. And if there's a kid on that team who's the 10th or 11th man on that junior high team, we talked to him, I've talked before in a show where we talked about how it's pretty hard to predict which junior high kids are going to grow up to be high school players. So, like, are we just going to forego their development, by not having enough time to get those kids in the game? I guess I was focusing a little bit more on, but no, I agree with you. It's probably still an outlier, but at the junior high level, I see more of these lopsided situations than I think anywhere else. And I think there's more of a need to play all the kids and to get them some minutes.
No, well, and it certainly is. And let's face it, Matt, it still comes back to I think you'd agree, I think we can agree on this for sure. A lot of times, no matter what great program we bring into our school as an administrator, it comes down to adult implementation, right? In terms of how,
Mhm.
we've come up with some great things at Paint Valley over the last couple of years, a smart pass in terms of how we track kids going to the restroom and in the hallway and so forth. And we have a couple different things I won't bore everybody with, but the bottom line of it is all of those things come down to how each teacher executes the program correctly in his or her classroom in order to make it work, in order for the data to be accurate, in order for us to have the correct supervision in place, right? So I think the reason I mention that is I think what you're saying also brings up another thing of coaches still carry a ton of responsibility here in terms of how they handle certain situations. Some coaches I think push to the 35 point mark where like it's okay to stop pressing when you're up 22. You know what I'm saying? And like turn it into a half court game or turn it into some of those scenarios. So I see some situations where they almost view the 35 point rule as, well, I'm allowed to do whatever up until that point.
Mhm.
Well, then you can't have it both ways. You can't purposely push it to 35 and then wonder why you don't have any time to put the other kids in. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Like if you're giving me that scenario in junior high and I'm coaching a team that's that good in junior high to where I can sense that I'm going to be in this situation in 3 out of 4 games throughout the whole year, 75% of my games. Well, I'm probably going to be looking at different segments of that game throughout where I'm playing different games within the game in terms of how I coach my team and so forth. Isn't that fair in terms of the
Yeah.
adult responsibility to still manage the game correctly throughout?
Well, it's like any other rule, Shane. I mean, how many rules do we have in sports and society that were derived from a few bad apples screwing it up for everybody, right? I mean, why is the mercy rule put? Part of the reason this rule's put in place is because you would get on Twitter and see where, oh, so and so last night won 116-4 in a girls' basketball game, right? You know what I mean? And so then it would raise questions of, well, do we need to? I almost call it forced sportsmanship, Shane, and it's like this could be
That's
another
interesting.
topic,
Yeah.
but it's like I know you're a big believer in the handshake line, right? Remember we had this. Remember when that topic came up,
Mhm.
like should we or shouldn't we shake hands
Yeah.
after a
It's
game?
not
And
it's not that hard to do. Yeah.
right. But, and I agree with you. I'm a believer in it too. But it's forced sportsmanship. It is
Mhm.
forced sportsmanship. We are forcing kids. We're going to force you to show sportsmanship because you're going to line up here and shake hands. Now, I would argue that's okay sometimes at that age. We do need to force that a little bit because kids aren't mature enough to make, where at the NBA level, they don't all line up in a perfectly straight line. We let them be adults. And if they want to go over and hug each other up after the game, fine. If they want to go to the locker room, whatever, but I think at the high school level or middle school level, whatever, there are cases where we need to force sportsmanship. And I
Mm.
think that's where probably this rule is beneficial. I think it's needed. I do think I would like to see some tweaks to it. I do think there are little things you could do to probably, you know, to probably not allow a minute to run off the clock with kids just standing there looking around. Okay.
Hmm.
I don't think, the ball gets kicked out of bounds and the referee grabs a towel and he wipes it down because he's thinking, right. He's like, man, this team, I feel sorry for this team. Let's try to get to, no, I mean, seriously, I
Right,
think
right.
officials try to help the situation too. Right. I mean,
Hmm.
they're certainly not trying to hurt it, but what I'm saying is, I don't think basketball was meant to just kids to stand around looking at the sky and have 40 seconds run off the clock either every time. So I think I
Hmm.
would like to see it tweaked a little bit, but I'm with you. I think all in all, I think it's a necessary rule. I think it's been a good thing. It's funny, Shane, and let me just say this is my closing thought, and then if you got something else, you can hit it. Okay. I, if you would have asked me a week ago, week and a half ago, what I thought of this rule, I'd have said, I love it. I think it's totally necessary. I have no problems with it. It was only as I got feedback from some junior high coaches, it was really the junior high coaches, the lower level coaches that at least got me thinking about this rule a little bit more in terms of, is it perfect or do we need to at least examine it a little bit? I still believe it's a good rule. I still like it. I still think it's necessary, but it has caused me to consider, are there little things maybe we could do to it along the way to help it? But no, as a whole, I think it's necessary.
Yeah, I think my closing remarks probably take everything we talked about, including the mercy rule, and that's a big summary of the show for me. Is steps in the right direction are being taken, but I beg people who are in leadership or in charge of anything to constantly be analyzing it and looking for improvements. I'm all for little tweaks to what you're saying about when that clock stops and when it runs and so forth. I think there's nothing wrong with that at all. I have trouble from my perspective over the course of my career of not analyzing things like this, things about competitive balance, the division talk, the computer points, all these things. I didn't even realize it through the week, Matt, how much they were going to connect in this show. But man, they really do fit together for me because it goes back to the fabric of how are we establishing a foundation in our programs through the little league levels, through junior high levels, through the freshman JV levels up to the varsity level, and to where we get a little bit more competitive balance back in our area. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm telling you, the little league culture, the junior high culture, in terms of where I see different programs going, I see different situations even up into the JV, even on the boys' side now into the JV levels in certain situations. You throw in some of the transferring, you throw in some of the off balance stuff, and all of a sudden, man, you can really get a lack of competitive balance that I didn't see in our area, at least going back 20 25 years. We had great teams, but
Right.
I'm saying the gap. Forget the gap between 1 and 8. I'm talking sometimes the gap between like 3 and 6. You know what I'm saying? Like
Right.
it's unbelievable in certain areas, in certain leagues. Because that's the one thing I have done this year is outside of just where I've always been an SBC person. I've actually watched a ton of games throughout. I've watched a lot of TVC basketball. I've really enjoyed some of the FAC this year, and I've watched a lot of different teams throughout. And it's interesting to me to just see some of the matchups and the different things there. So I would challenge people to continue to make great leadership choices, to continue to analyze things and to tweak things when needed, but don't always look for a fix all. Don't judge things the first day they're implemented and judge them on an all or nothing scale. And then I guess the final thing I would say there is I go back to the very beginning of the show where I guess I'm numb to the Ohio High School Athletic Association from a dollars and cents standpoint. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
one of those things I know that exists in my day-to-day grind working with kids and loving what I do. I don't know if I care, Matt. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
it's one of those things where maybe I should. That's why I asked you earlier, should I? And that's kind of where I'm at. So I yeah, are we done there? I just, like I said, I never want to cut you
Right.
off on anything. Do you feel like that we've covered that the correct way tonight, or is there something we're missing?
No, I think we have. And I think I like the way you sum that up in terms of, with all this stuff we've talked about tonight, right? The tournament procedures, the potential of adding more divisions, this mercy rule, you know, I think the way you sum that up of hey, listen, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Let's not just say, well, this doesn't work, and let's make sure we take it for what it's worth. Let's add some stuff. Let's take some stuff away. Let's give things um a few years before we just say, it doesn't work. I think there's been a lot of good rules over the years that if people would have given up on them too early, before they were able to get adjusted a little bit, it would have hurt the game, the different sports, right? So, no, I'm with you. I think that's well said, and it's like I say every week, it's fun talking about these topics. I know next week we're going to tackle some other issues. We still got some shows on the horizon of some stuff with coaching and assistant coaches and head coaches and some things we've noticed and some things we want to talk about. It seems like we've talked a lot about rules, a lot about officials, and I think we're going to shift gears a little bit now, start talking a little bit more about players and coaches. So I'm looking forward to that too.
Yeah, I'm excited. I was looking through my notes today. I'm excited down the line of some different ideas I've had. Someone to talk to me about the evolution of the point guard position over the last 25, 30 years from my playing days into my coaching days now. And they've also talked about the four position. When we were growing up, Matt, we had a lot more of the two post lineups. Certainly that exists sometimes today, but not nearly as much, right? You hear more of the four out, one in, or that four position, that power forward position called when we were growing up, has taken on a lot of different things. So again, if we have any feedback on those particular things, or if you have different ideas for the show, please, please, please reach out to us and let us know. So, Matt, on that note, a lot of fun. Put a cap on show 63. Thank you, Dr. Chris Good. Encourage everybody to watch us on YouTube. Check us out wherever you get your podcast out there. You'll find us on Expanding the Zone. So, until next time, appreciate everybody listening. Appreciate everybody giving us feedback, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everyone.